because there is a fundamental contradiction in our current system. We are producing the little graduates that we are producing, but we are not producing the jobs. We are educating young people into unemployment. That is not empowerment. You are just delaying frustrations, and you are adding to now what would be those who are educated will now be frustrated, and those who are uneducated will see no need for them to be educated because they are going to fall in the bracket of those who are educated, frustrated as well. We speak of a fourth industrial revolution and artificial intelligence, yet we have not fully industrialized our own economy. We cannot leap into the future while neglecting the foundations of production and manufacturing. Our education must therefore be aligned with a clear and direct industrial strategy. Our curriculum must evolve. It must be decolonized, and it must speak directly to the economic realities of our times. So you don't need anyone's validation to ensure that your dream is kept alive. We gather here tonight not merely to just dine, but to affirm a principle that education must not be a privilege reserved for a few, but a lived reality for all. This evening calls on us to restore the dignity of learning, to make education fashionable, not as a trend, but as a national commitment rooted in justice, rooted in equality and economic freedom. As we gather here today, we do so on Workers' Day, a day that is not merely just symbolic, but one that is rooted in the blood and the sweat and the sacrifices of the working class. This gathering, though defined and celebratory, is deeply embedded in the struggle of the working class. Those charged with the responsibility of the state, we have somehow given also ourselves over to corruption, eroding what little financial and moral legitimacy the state has. We've got to answer the question, why would it take so long for the state to declare the building of a simple university like the University of Technology, Nkululeko, but a counterproductive organization that is extremely racist is able to build a university and run it within record time? Every stolen rand is a classroom that is not built. Every stolen rand is a student that is not funded. Every stolen rand is a future that is denied. If we are serious about education, we must be equally serious about eradicating corruption and strengthening accountability. But we must also go a little bit further. The state must play a more active role in the economy, not as a passive regulator, but as a participant that generates revenue, drives industrialization, and is at the center of the creation of jobs.
Late night lights in the studio glow, dreams on the mic, ready to go. From a small idea to a powerful sound, Noko Entertainment turning voices around. Cameras rolling, the signal is clear.
Don't forget that he's a businessman. Should form part of it. There's nothing wrong with engaging in business as long as it's in line and it's principled and speaks to be an entrepreneur. So that which we see on TVs and all of those things does not matter. He's a businessman engaged in the activities of business and should never be ashamed of that. Dr. Past, Professor Hendricks, Dr. Pillay, Dr. Mlindelwa, Nobaba Mfundisi Usiso Tombela, the leadership of the Pretoria Attorney Association led by Advocate and Risco, members of the academia from all tertiary institutions present, all NGOs, the way that you have invited would have not come here, perhaps because they had other plans, but also maybe because they didn't see the vision. And you must carry out and do everything in your power so that you continue with what you have started. So that even next year when they see you, they see the picture, and in actual fact from tomorrow when they see the pictures, everyone that has pledged here, because they would have seen that there is something that was planted and has continued with or without them. So you don't need anyone's validation to ensure that your dream is kept alive. We gather here tonight not merely to just dine, but to affirm a principle that education must not be a privilege reserved for a few, but a lived reality for all. This evening calls on us to restore the dignity of learning, to make education fashionable, not as a trend, but as a national commitment rooted in justice, rooted in equality and economic freedom. As we gather here today, we do so on Workers' Day, a day that is not merely just symbolic, but one that is rooted in the blood, and the sweat, and the sacrifices of the working class. This gathering, though defined and celebratory, is deeply embedded in the struggle of the working class. Is where do they go? Into unemployment, into informal survival, into cycles of poverty and exclusion. This is not merely a statistic, it is a reality. It's a reflection of a society that is failing to retain and nurture its own human potential. Program Director and our distinguished guests, let this particular point be clear. Our position should always be consistent, that education must be free, that education must be of quality standard, and that education must reflect the past, the present, and the future attitudes of a decolonized people. It must be free because no child of a young person should be denied access as a result of being poor. It must be quality because access without excellence is hollow victory. It must be decolonized because our education system must reflect the lived realities. It must reflect on history and the aspirations of African people in particular. And it must prepare learners to not only pass exams, but to participate meaningfully in the economic activities of this country. We must also remind ourselves that the call for education that we make today is not abstract. It is a call that speaks directly to the lived realities of the poor and the working class. It speaks to the children of domestic workers. It speaks to the children of cleaners, of security guards, of mine workers, and of the unemployed parents who linger at home. These are families, even when they are employed, they earn wages so low that they cannot afford what has now become commodified. What this means is that education should be a tool of liberation. It should be a tool of liberation. However, it has instead become a mechanism of exclusion. It is prized beyond the reach of those who need it the most, effectively trapping generations into cycles of poverty. When we say education must be free, we're not making a populist demand. We're making a necessary economic and moral intervention to restore dignity to the working class. The challenges that are facing our children are not just limited to the classrooms. They are shaped by the conditions in which they live in. As many of our communities' basic service delivery failures continue to undermine the right to education. We have children who have to walk through unmaintained and unsafe environments, where overgrown bushes become sites of violence and vulnerability. We have learners who have to go to school without electricity in their homes, making it effectively impossible at times to even engage in activities such as homeworks. The fact of the matter is that the lived experience in Gauteng for a number of our children directly disrupts teaching and learning. We have households and schools that go without water, making it impossible for children to maintain basic hygiene and dignity. To see a child coming to school, from Monday to Friday at 8 o'clock, from a settlement like Jeffreysville, means that children have defeated battles some of us can only begin to imagine. What this means is that access to education is not only about fees or infrastructure, but it is about the broader conditions of the living conditions of our people. A child cannot learn effectively in an environment defined by insecurity, defined by hunger and neglect. These are not isolated failures. They become part of our failures that were part of government as well. We therefore call upon those entrusted with the responsibility of local government, particularly in our metro such as Tshwane, to fast-track service delivery. The safety, the dignity, and the well-being of our children cannot be delayed by administrative inefficiency or political complacency. Service delivery must be targeted. It must be deliberate, it must be urgent, because it directly shapes educational outcomes. Let us also note that education does not exist in isolation from social realities. In this province, in fact, a girl child is forced to miss school at times, simply because sanitary products are to this day not made free or compulsory hygiene products that must be made available in all public institutions. The message we are sending is not merely that menstruations are a disruption, it is also a free and democratic society. We have not been able to realize that the most basic understanding of barriers to freedom are as such. This is why the provision of sanitary dignity is not a luxury. It is an educational necessity. Similarly to the health and nutritional challenges faced by our learners, including food insecurity, directly affect concentration, it affects attendance, and unfortunately it also affects academic performance. That's why this government, under the Premier Panyaza Sufi, has ensured that we make sure that we provide a nutritional program in all schools regardless of whether they are fee-paying or non-fee-paying schools. We must also confront the growing divide between public and private education. In South Africa, in Gauteng, learners have those who have access to world-class facilities, small classrooms, digital tools, and global opportunities. In Anam, the majority of they struggle with overcrowding, under-resourcing, and limited exposure. This dual system reproduces inequality and undermines social cohesion. It tells the child in a public school that the future is negotiable, while guaranteeing opportunities to those who can afford. That is not a neutral system. It is an unjust one. At the same time, we must reject the dangerous rise of xenophobia, particularly when it manifests as a black people turning against fellow Africans. It is a tragic misdirection of anger. While we fight each other for limited resources, the structural inequalities that benefit a privileged minority, they remain intact. The reality is that access to quality education and economic opportunity remains skewed, and fighting amongst ourselves only entrenches that imbalance. But we know very well that it is precisely due to the lack of decolonized education that our people are easily hoodwinked into believing and supporting counterproductive, regressive, and reactionary ideas that seek to divide our attention from the real issues that are facing the people of Gauteng. It is a lack of proper education that misinforms and misleads our people into hating each other, into hating fellow Africans, and accusing them of taking their non-existing jobs and placement in schools. The literacy rate in South Africa, the literacy standard in Gauteng, does not match what is available for its citizens on the labor market. And we cannot blame anyone but ourselves for insisting on a government that cannot adapt itself to the realities by continuing to keep this status quo, while insisting on a scenario where government has no plans for jobs, let alone for the kind of quality jobs its citizens deserve and want. We must be clear. Our struggle is not against one another, but against racial inequality, it's against exclusion, it's against historical injustice. We also cannot ignore the financial realities that are faced by the state, because the status quo has created a situation where the state can no longer belong to the people, but is a perfect rendering of baseless on the needs of the people. The demand for social and economic intervention far exceeds the current fiscal capacity. Infrastructure backlog persists, not only because of limited resources. We ask ourselves, why is that so? That is because those charged with the responsibility of the state, we have somehow given also ourselves over to corruption, eroding what little financial and moral legitimacy the state has. We've got to answer the question, why would it take so long for the state to declare the building of a simple university like the University of Technology, Nkululeko, but a counterproductive organization that is extremely racist is able to build a university and run it within record time? Every stolen rand is a classroom that is not built. Every stolen rand is a student that is not funded. Every stolen rand is a future that is denied. If we are serious about education, we must be equally serious about eradicating corruption and strengthening accountability. But we must also go a little bit further. The state must play a more active role in the economy, not as a passive regulator, but as a participant that generates revenue, drives industrialization, and is at the center of the creation of jobs. Because there is a fundamental contradiction in our current system. We are producing the little graduates that we are producing, but we are not producing the jobs. We are educating young people into unemployment. That is not empowerment. You are just delaying frustrations, and you are adding to now what would be those who are educated will now be frustrated, and those who are uneducated will see no need for them to be educated because they are going to fall in the bracket of those who are educated, frustrated as well. We speak of a fourth industrial revolution and artificial intelligence, yet we have not fully industrialized our own economy. We cannot leap into the future while neglecting the foundations of production and manufacturing. Our education must therefore be aligned with a clear and direct industrial strategy. Our curriculum must evolve. It must be decolonized, and it must speak directly to the economic realities of our times. Not just for employment, but to participate in building a prosperous economy. This is why we must invest in the recapitalization of TVET colleges. Ensure that we are properly funded, that they must be modernized, and they must be aligned to industrial needs. Not every learner must go to a university or can go to a university, but every learner must have a viable and dignified pathway into the economy through educational emancipation. At the same time, we must be bold enough to demand the establishment of a university in every single municipality. We must have access to higher education, as this cannot remain geographically and economically exclusive. And to those who think that this is unrealistic, and it's unrealistic of a demand, we say, What is unrealistic is expecting development without investing in knowledge. Even those who are busy campaigning for positions, we must demand that slogans will not build institutions, political will and resources will. We must demand for a reconfiguration of NEFSAS in itself. Because someone has got to explain to us why the Department of Higher Education cannot just send the money direct to the universities to pay. More so, we cannot speak about education in South Africa without acknowledging the historical role of the Fees Must Fall movement. It was this generation of young people who stood up against financial exclusion, who disrupted complacency, and who forced the country to confront the injustice of commodified education system. Their struggle was not in vain. It reshaped policy, it shifted national consciousness, and it reminded us that meaningful change often comes from the courage of the youth. Program Director, today that struggle continues. Student debts in South Africa exceeds 60 billion rand. This affects more than 700,000 students. This is not just a debt, it is a barrier towards opportunity. It locks young people out of employment and further studying, even after they have succeeded academically. In addition, over 200,000 qualifying applicants are excluded from higher education year on year due to a lack of space and funding. This is not a failure of individuals, it is a failure of our own system. This means hundreds and thousands of young people are unable to access their academic records and qualifications, effectively locking them out of employment, further studying, and entrepreneurship. What this reflects is not simply unpaid fees, but it is a system that produces exclusion even after academic success. Ours is a simple demand which is unapologetically clear. Higher education must be fully state-funded for the poor and the working class. Student debt must be cancelled, and institutions of higher learning must be expanded. Anything less than that is just a way of preserving inequality. An educated society is not a luxury, but it is economic necessity. Youth unemployment remains above 40%, and it is the highest amongst those without access to post-school education and training. The link between education and economic participation is direct, and you cannot deny it. As the provincial government of Gauteng, our budget must reflect this particular reality. It must prioritize education not as just consumption, but as an investment into the future. It must expand on infrastructure, it must fund students, it must support educators, it must create an enabling environment for learning and innovation. That's why in the next few weeks we are going to announce on how, in terms of infrastructure development of schools, we are going to go into that space to address these challenges, such as engaging in public-private partnerships, as well as build, operate, and transfers of companies who are going to build the schools for us and later transfer them back to us. As a province and a provincial government of Gauteng, our budget is not merely just a financial document. It is a political statement of priorities. It must therefore then reflect on our commitment to the people. It must prioritize education not as an expenditure, as we repeat again, but as an investment. We must utilize the Gauteng provincial budget to expand funding for students in higher education and technical institutions, strengthen early childhood development as the foundation of learning, invest in infrastructure that creates conducive learning environments, support research and innovation that drives economic growth, and ensure that no deserving student is left behind as a result of financial constraint. This must also confront the lived realities of students, where accommodation backlog runs into tens of thousands of beds, where a significant proportion of students face food insecurity, where many still lack access to devices, they lack access to data and reliable connectivity. The meaning of these conditions is that access to education, even when it is given to you, is undermined by the material conditions of poverty. Addressing these challenges requires deliberate intervention. It requires the expansion of publicly funded student accommodation, the provision of comprehensive student support, including ensuring that you have food and living allowances, the rolling out of accessible digital infrastructure, and the alignment of education with an industrial strategy that ensures that graduates are absorbed into growing and labor-absorbing economies. Let us also take the moment on this particular day with solemnity and clarity acknowledge the children of Marikana. These are children whose parents were brutally taken away from them in the pursuit of a living wage. They are children who continue to bear the consequences of a capitalist system that prioritized profit over human lives. We must never forget them. When we speak of education for all, we must be reminded they are the children of those who were killed in Marikana, who still today have no access to education. Their struggle did not end there. It continued in their exclusion from opportunities, including the education we speak of. They too are deserving of a future